Let me record this here. All right. Share screen. All right. The American Chemical Society is a scientific society based in the US that supports scientific inquiries in chemistry, and the California section promotes chemistry and chemical professions in Northern California area. And we provide programs and services for our members, recognize and assist educators and students, and host public outreach events. And most of our events are online and open to all and free, so you can attend them from everywhere in the world. To learn more about our activities and upcoming events, check out our website, callcs.org. Association of Women's Science is another involved party in this event, and AWIS is a global network and strives to ensure that women in STEM can achieve their full potential by breaking down barriers and creating opportunities. AWIS has 49 chapters in the US, including ours, and similar to ACS or AWIS East Bay events, nowadays most of them are online. And to learn more about AWIS and our activities and upcoming events, please check out ebavis.org and follow us on social media. Before going to the event, just I want to make sure people, please mute your profile so we don't have background noise. And if you have any question, type it in the chat box, either to all or just to me, and I'll ask it from Professor Lipomi. Going back to also, we have an upcoming event between Cal SCS and AWIS on August 4th that is open to all. So I encourage you to check out our website and register for this if you like to. All right, our May event, which I'm really excited about. The decision to do PhD is very exciting, but also overwhelming. And there's so much at stake to where to attend, and more importantly, whom to choose as an advisor. And in this seminar and discussion, Professor Lipomi from UC San Diego will offer his thoughts on selecting PhD program and advisor to give you best chance for flourishing personally, professionally, and scientifically. He will have a brief overview, and then we'll open a Q&A question part. Professor Lipomi here, he's earned his bachelor degree in chemistry with minor in physics, Beckman Scholar as a Beckman Scholar at Boston University. He earned his PhD in chemistry from Harvard, then moved to Stanford to be a postdoctoral fellow, and he's now a professor in Department of Nanoengineering and programming chemical engineering at UC San Diego. And he also hosts podcasts, molecular podcasting with Daniel Lipomi, which is pretty interesting. We are excited to have you here, Dr. Lipomi, and please take it away. Let me unshare the screen. It's a little. Stop share. All right.
All right. Thank you, Atafe, so much for the introduction, and thanks so much for the invitation to speak to all of you today. So my name is Darren Lipomi. I have been in my position as a PI. This is for 9 full years. Actually, the 10th anniversary of my first day was on July 1st. So it's a good time to sit back and sort of reflect on some of the things that I've learned about mentoring now that I've seen the PI selection process a few different times as a student and as an incoming postdoc, and now as somebody who hires or who selects students for my research group. So these are not rules. By the way, it's just me talking. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes or so, and then I hope to have a discussion. So I don't have slides. So these are not really rules, but more of considerations. I don't like to be so dogmatic as to say that these are the rules that you need to follow, because this is such a personal decision that it's really impossible to distill these into rules like the F=ma of choosing an advisor. Nevertheless, this will be one of the most important decisions that you ever make in your life. But unfortunately, you have to make it at a time when you have basically the least amount of experience and knowledge to make the judgment that that will lead you to the best decision. And so, what I hope to do is to be able to tell you about some of the considerations on which you should put your weight when you're making that you should wait to make this decision. So it's complicated by the fact that you're heavily emotionally involved in this decision, and a lot of your planning can sort of go out the window just under the pressure to make a decision. So you might be visiting a campus in February, and maybe you have to make a decision by April 15th. And that decision will affect not just the next 4 to 6 years during the PhD, but also your relationship with the school that you did your degree in and the advisor with whom you did your degree, who may need to support you going forward in your career. A lot of this will depend on your personal risk assessment too. So you have to be able to anticipate how you're going to respond to external forces. And a lot of times this is brought up in the area of personal finance. Like, do I, now that I'm not a student and I'm investing in like maybe a bond fund and maybe a stock market fund, and one has more risk than the other, and there's no right answer of what distribution you're going to put your money in, but you have to know something about your own risk tolerance and the way that external events are going to affect your mental health, which is another huge part of the decision to choose a PI and a program and a department. So there are 6 considerations that I'm going to talk about. There are 4 real considerations, and there are 2 sort of pre-flight considerations. So this is consideration -1. And the -1 consideration is, should you go to grad school in the first place? And the answer is yes, if you love research, because 4 to 6 years is a lot of time in your 20s to be making less than minimum wage in a new place, in a place that has an undetermined, undefined relationship, or poorly defined, poorly delineated relationship with your advisor and possibly your coworkers. So you have to actually love research and not go just because you've always been in school and are afraid of the real world. And I admit to falling into this category big time. When I was applying to grad school, like, I did not want to apply for a job in the real world. I liked school, I liked my undergraduate lab, and I wanted to keep doing it. And maybe that's a good decision. Maybe maybe it wasn't. It's hard to come up with a counterfactual and say how my life would have been if I didn't go to grad school. Should you go to grad school in the first place? The next consideration, or the next question to ask yourself is, do you still want to go knowing that a PhD is more consuming than a full-time job? So chances are you'll be putting more than 40 hours a week into the lab. You might not be in the lab for more than 25 hours a week, but you will be thinking about your research for probably 50 or 60 hours a week, even if you're not in the building. It is consuming. So deciding to do a, a, a PhD degree is a commitment to obtaining a what I would call a black belt in creating knowledge. So you want to put that dent into the unknown, and sometimes that your project doesn't want to yield to your efforts, and it can be very frustrating at times. And it's not like a position where you clock in at 9 and you clock out at 5. You're going to be taking, if not the work home with you, you're going to be taking the emotion from the work with you. You're going to be thinking about atoms and molecules before you go to bed, and whether you want to or not, it's a little bit like playing Tetris. You're going to see those blocks falling. You're going to see those bonds being formed and broken. Keep in mind that if you're applying to a PhD program because you want to become a professor yourself, know that with this mindset, graduate education is not quite a pyramid scheme, but it has some characteristics of a pyramid scheme. Only about 5% of PhDs in all academic fields are employed as tenure track professors. And it's just a numbers game. It's the fact that a lab might have 5 people in it. It might have 20 or 40 people in it. And there's only one professor. And a professor position is a lot like a professional musician in an orchestra or an opera. That first chair trombonist might not retire for another 30 years for that position to open up again. And it's a numbers game. So learn about the full gamut of options available to PhD scientists before making the decision to do a PhD. That's one of our pre-flight considerations. That's consideration -1. Consideration 0 is the research topic. And this is not quite independent of the choice to join a particular PI's lab in a particular university, but it is something that is very closely related to the work you feel good about doing, the work that you want to do in the future. So the right topic, the right research topic will probably be some balance of what you're most excited about. That is, you're excited about the basic research or maybe the longer term application or maybe some combination. You're excited about the working with a particular PI, and you're excited about the group culture. So that it's the right topic is a combination of these things. The topic itself, so how does it excite you, the PI, and the group culture. What I would say is don't restrict yourself to the topic of your undergraduate research. So the topic of your undergraduate research might be completely random. You might have chosen it randomly. Chances are it was kind of random. You might have knocked on 5 professors' doors or sent out 20 emails, and maybe only one person responded, or maybe three people responded, and you found what you thought was the best one, and you explored that opportunity. Or maybe you applied to a summer fellowship or an REU, and maybe there was one lab that you got into, and you ended up joining that lab. Or maybe you had a choice of 10 labs, but you didn't have the background to choose based on the paragraph description, or maybe what was on the website, if the professor even had a website, and you just kind of chose it. And chances are, if you want to go to grad school, you probably ended up liking that topic. But the reason you like that topic might not necessarily be because it's what you knew that you wanted to do originally. It's because probably you became good at it, and people tend to like what they become good at. So one one thing that I would caution you against is choosing exactly your undergraduate research topic in graduate school, because people don't really grow unless they move a little bit, at least, between topics. I think that human beings in general tend to stay stagnant a little bit because they spend their precious moments doing what they already know how to do. For example, I play the piano a little bit. I'm not as good as I should be for somebody who's been playing as long as I have, and the reason is because I only play what I sound good playing, and because to learn something new is disheartening. You don't feel like you're very good at it. You feel like people are judging you for it, and the tendency is just to reinforce what we already know. There are some fields, however, where some PIs may not hire you unless you have a very specific undergraduate training. A good example is I don't want to get in trouble, but there are some fields within maybe hardcore organic synthesis where if the PI doesn't know that you like doing setting up a lot of chemical reactions, doing biphasic workups in a SEP funnel, doing columns and NMRs, and you don't know that you like to do that, that might be a topic that you want to that you might want to avoid. However, if a PI is going to reject you because you don't have some very specific undergraduate training, it might say more about the PI and maybe the field than it says about you. Okay, those are the two pre-flight considerations. So -1 is should you go to grad school in the first place, and then consideration 0 is the research topic. So here are the real considerations. All right, consideration 1. Should you join an established lab or a lab of an up and coming PI? So there are big name PIs and super labs that have, say, more than 20 grad students and postdocs that often get a lot of papers and have a lot of funding, but they have significant disadvantages. For example, students have to be highly self-motivated or they will languish. Oftentimes, the PIs of these labs don't have a lot of time to spend with their students on a one-on-one basis. That was basically how my research lab was as a graduate student. We had maybe 30, by the time I graduated, we had something like 35 postdocs and 5 grad students in my lab. And my PI was out of town maybe 75% of the year. And I gave one group meeting per year for 5 years. And we had maybe 5 meetings where we actually talked about my life and career. And was that an ideal scenario? Maybe it maybe it was for some people. I probably would have gotten more out of my relationship with my advisor if they were actually around. On the flip side, my PhD advisor was able to write a letter that had a lot of weight because people knew who he was. Interestingly, when I moved to my postdoc advisor was also famous, but she was not quite as famous. But the lab was actually bigger during the time that I was there than my PhD lab, and she did actually make the time to meet with us on a biweekly basis, which was wonderful. So one size does not fit all in terms of big versus small, but these are some of the aspects of that decision. Another issue facing large labs is that there is a potential for a low level of not just quality control of the research output, but also the depth of scholarship that's possible in these huge labs. And this is understanding that I only really came to recently once I started my own lab. And that is, if I get a really deep scholarly piece of work from a student or a postdoc, it takes me probably the better part of 6 consecutive weekends. You know, we iterate during the week. The student maybe sends it back. Maybe it takes a few weeks or a month to send it back, and then I might take all of my downtime on like in evenings or weekends. Let's say it's a full Saturday worth of time when I'm not getting any incoming from department requests or requests to review manuscripts or grants or something like that. It takes a long time for the PI to be able to provide quality advice, to provide quality scholarly guidance on deep pieces of scholarship and really impactful papers. And if a deep scholarly paper emerges from a super lab, it's almost certainly because of an especially good postdoc or senior grad student who did all of the heavy lifting or most of the heavy lifting by themselves. I just don't believe that a PI of a super lab can really put all that much thought at all into a really deep piece of work. And what that says maybe is that if a deep piece of work does come out of a group of a super lab, could it have been better if the PI actually had time to devote to it? Probably yes. In looking at up and coming labs, it is often good to look at the derivative of the productivity. So it is much better to be in a place where there is a lot of excitement, there's a lot of growth, there is a lot of innovation, and growth and quality that you perceive to be increasing when observed from the outside. And that's much easier to find in an up and coming lab with a younger or newer PI. In an older PI's laboratory, they might be they're more likely to be at a mesa. They're more likely to be at a plateau. All right. Consideration number 2 has to do with group culture. So ideally, you want to be in a place where your happiness is as decoupled as possible from the day-to-day success of your specific project. So there will be months that go by where literally nothing good happens. So when I was a graduate student, I started in 2005, and I didn't have my first paper until 2008. For the first 2 years, basically nothing worked. And the way that I was able to get through that period of time was by having a group of supportive, in my case, supportive postdoc mentors who were able to shepherd me through this difficult process. So what you should do during your visitation period is to talk to as many graduate students as possible and ask yourselves, are the students excited, healthy, happy with their progress? Are they collaborative? Does the lab value diversity of sex, race, gender, religion, and perhaps especially personality types? Do they value having introverts and extroverts? Do they value this kind of diversity? The reason that you don't want a monolithic lab is not only because it leads to is because not only is it better for for the science, and it's better for the people in the lab, but also it provides a place of resilience. If people approach problems in climate, in culture from different, and in science from different perspectives, then there is resilience built into the lab, and that could be emotional as well as scientific, because isolation is one of the surest routes to depression, and being united by a common mission, like a collaborative project or a supportive group, is the surest bulwark, or surest cure against despair. Also, on the topic of talking to as many graduate students as possible, a lot of them will actually, a lot of the grad students will actually give you the rosy picture of the lab, and maybe and even in labs where things are not going really well, they might still give you an overly positive picture. And that's why these physical characteristics like excited, healthy, happy, ask them specifically. Ask students in other labs how someone in another lab would answer the same question. And these are ways of getting at the truth when people may not be 100% forthcoming. And it's not because they want to deceive you. It's rather that people like to justify their own choices, and they also may be feeling good that day, and they may tell you what feels good to them to say. Not everywhere, but just know that this is potentially an issue. So consideration number 3 is the PI themselves. So we're going to assume that most PIs, at least the PIs that you are considering, are competent researchers. They're experts in their topics, and they're doing something new and interesting. If the PI doesn't check the scientific boxes, then look elsewhere to begin with. So what you want to do is choose a PI who will allow you to flourish. And what does that mean? That means support when you want it. It means clarity of expectations. And a lot of what I said about, and look at the culture as well. So a lot of what I said about group culture also applies to the PI, because the PI influences the culture by the way in which they do their hiring. So these are quantitative things that you can ask. Try to find out not only if the people in the lab have gotten the types of positions that you want, but also that the people who left the lab are still getting support if they're asking for it. That tells you that a PI is interested in your success after you leave. Also try to find out the attrition rate, or whether students have left the group under less than amicable circumstances. So PIs are going to try to put their best foot forward in the visitation weekend, and it's a little hard to judge the future, but you can get a sense of trust and openness from an advisor by asking questions like this. Questions that might be like perceived as a turnoff are how many hours you require. There are ways of asking that question that ask the professor uh, to be clear about their expectations. So get them to talk about their expectations for how much progress do you expect, week by week, how many publications, or what quality of publications, or how many discoveries, or whether or not I need to come up with my own idea at some point, whether or not there's a theory and modeling component to this work, or will that be required of me in order to graduate down the line? These are the kinds of things that are a bit more, that you'll get more information from than simply asking, how many hours do you expect? Those are things that you can ask the students. Just ask, like, what's a typical day like for you? And that's a very easy way to get the information that you need. Okay, finally, consideration 4, that has to do with the institution and the location. So I'm not gonna, be a hypocrite and say that a degree from a fancy school means nothing, because it does mean a little bit to some people. There is a type of it's a type of pre-vetting that says that if you got into this highly ranked institution, somebody else has already done the hard work of judging how good you are, which is kind of ridiculous, because by the time you apply for a job, somebody made that decision 4 to 6 years ago, and that decision is made without any like reference to what you actually did during your PhD. So that's kind of like a kind of not a good metric. What you want to do is so along the same lines, there are some top tier companies that I won't name that sort of already place your application in a bucket depending on the PhD institution, and give a salary premium to people from those places. And in some sense, you can understand, because like they're trying to de-risk their process. But there are a lot of sources of inequity that type of binning produces, that is really a bad thing, especially because the PIs at the top places, like the top 5 places in whatever field you're in, are not usually regarded as the most attentive mentors. There is a lot of attrition in those labs. There is a lot of mastering out that is for people who intended to get a PhD but left on less than amicable terms with their advisor. And the higher up the chain of U.S. News and World Report, the more likely you are to find an inattentive advisor, and that is the other side of the coin. The PI is much more important overall than the program or the department, and the department actually has very little influence on your life after the first year. As to the location, say a cold school, school in a cold place, or a warm place, or some distance from home, or an international place, that's a highly personal decision, and I really don't have any insights about it because of how personal it is. Most people committed enough to research will find that they don't have a lot of options and go where they get into grad school or a postdoc or a job. So, so that said, going to grad school was the best, one of the best decisions that I've actually made, and I believe uh, in in all of you to make like a good decision here. It's like it's always so humbling to be around people that want to take 4 to 6 years of their 20s or 30s and devote it to creating knowledge and doing great things with it. And this is a critical step in that process. And I hope I've said something useful here, and I'm happy to have a discussion.
Thank you so much. This was great. And as I was listening to you, I was reflecting back and thinking there were things I should have considered when I had a graduate school, and I was so naive at that time, had no clue, kind of, especially being international. Everyone, please write down your question in the chat box, and I ask Dr. Lipomi. We had a couple of questions already that I can ask, and there's a question that is kind of related to what you started and the kind of end of the conversation about school. You mentioned there's 5% chance of general becoming a faculty member. So if you are not able to get into a top 20, 30 school, is there a chance, reasonable chance that you'll be able to get a tenure track position? And does it mean you have to then for sure do a postdoc because you were not able to get admission for those top schools?
Sure. So the 5% number does not apply necessarily to chemistry. Each field is that's all PhDs granted in all PhD programs in the United States. In engineering, the number is higher. So engineers, the labs tend to be smaller, and also there is kind of like a burgeoning of engineering departments and the sizes of departments, and they're actually growing. So a lot of places are actually taking on new faculty members. The university system as like a business is actually growing. It would be like it would be a good time to invest in like the R1 institution if that were an asset class because of the types of investments that are flowing into R1 universities. To answer the specific question, if you were not able to get into a school in the top 20, are your dreams of becoming a professor dashed? Absolutely not. And the reason is because you can't say like how productive you're going to be during that time. But at the time that you apply, you might make a substantial discovery. You might end up with a phone book of Jack's papers. You might be there at a time when the ranking of the university changes for the better. When I started at my position, UCSD was the engineering school was number 17. Now it's number 9. So things change all the time, and 5 years is not a long time for them to change. The other consideration is that most people, everybody who wants a faculty position in chemistry should, and because of the ACS tie-in to this event, I'll say chemistry. Everyone doing a PhD in chemistry, biology, or physics needs to do a postdoc in order to get a faculty position at an R1 institution. Is it easier in the top 20? Those schools tend to be a little bit, more resourced, but does it dash your dreams? Absolutely not. And there is good science to be done everywhere, and you never know what's going to happen. This is one of the surest things about life is the uncertainty, and a lot of times it works out in your favor as well. Even if you this is like a meditation trick, like chocolate meditation. They say like have a bite of chocolate and really internalize how it makes your senses, respond, and think about all the, the farmers and the supply chain and everything that went into it. Now, the chocolate taste has dissipated. And now try to recall or try to anticipate what that next bite is going to taste like. And you can't do it. You put it in your mouth and the experience is different. And if we don't even know like what our moment to moment experience is going to feel like, we have no idea what's going to happen when we decide to go into a new graduate program. So anything can happen.
Thank you. We have a bunch of questions about, I think it's application process. And one of the questions is that I think it's for when they write their statement of purpose and they show interest, if they show diverse interest, do people committee think these people don't know what they want to do? Or is it, if they're coming, they might show interest in different labs, and how does that get perceived?
This will differ depending on the committee and whether or not the PIs are making direct offers or whether or not the students are admitted as a cohort. To me, when somebody has diverse interests, it's a good thing. If I'm reading the application, I can't speak more broadly in cohort type programs where everyone is admitted at once without specific matching to an advisor. It's probably not a bad thing at all.
Thank you. Someone asked if you got a master degree with a paper but not from top school, how does it consider over someone with bachelor degree with not much research experience but from very top school like UC Berkeley, MIT? Like, which one will have a better chance of admission? Like,
I put a lot of stock in papers, and not and there are some equity issues around using papers as a metric for graduate admissions, because not everybody has access to a research lab. Not everybody can volunteer in a lab long enough to get a paper, and so forth. But if you have a paper from a master's program that is maybe not the most prominent program, that would tell me that you have sought out the resources and have a commitment to research. So ultimately, and that's a very positive thing. So ultimately, we look at a gamut of characteristics when making our decisions, but that would strike me as a very positive attribute in an application.
Thank you. So nowadays everything is virtual. So how has been your experience this past 2 years of virtual tours for prospective new students? And do you think it has hurt decisions the student made in picking their school or research team?
It's hard to say from the PI's side. I have the impression that it went so in the 2020 cycle, we actually had our visitation right before COVID restrictions. This past year was 100% remote. I was actually I didn't neither of the students I made offers to decided to come here. So I came up empty and ended up promoting a master's student to a PhD. And that's how I filled that slot. And I'm very happy with that decision. It's hard to say. I might have to take a pass on that question, but I have the feeling that people that it went fairly well, all things considered. And at least students didn't have to fly to multiple, different places and be exhausted and give sweaty handshakes to 10, nervous handshakes to 12 different faculty.
Thank you. So David is asking, what's the best way to locate a lab based on your interests? There's so many schools, so many labs. How can they narrow down which labs they should and which schools should they apply for?
A highly underutilized function is Twitter search. So if you can go on Twitter and find these PIs. A lot of them do have a social media presence. I would use YouTube as well. Most PIs that are active like at all in their fields will have at least one talk that's on YouTube, and that is a great place to find it. The ACS website, probably not. The school websites, they are sometimes updated, but sometimes they're often out of date. I would look for stuff that the PI or the PI's lab group has curated relatively, regularly.
Thank you. So Maram is asking, when applying to schools, is it best to have one specific PI in mind when applying? Wouldn't that be limiting in a way?
I think it's best to have one top choice and then at least one other backup, probably two other backups. So when I applied, I did not end up joining the first two labs that I rotated in. My first choice at the time that I applied was not my first choice once I arrived. I joined the lab of the third PI that I rotated with, and not every department, not every type of department has rotations. They tend to be more common in chemistry and the natural sciences in general, simply because the students can be supported by TA ships during the first year while they're doing their rotations.
Yeah, that's true. Like when I joined Hopkins for chemistry program, we could not pick a lab before having tried two or three lab, and no professor was allowed to officially say this is my student before having accepted a few students in their lab. But my sister is in computer engineering, and she had picked the advisor, and through the advisor got the applicant. So it's, I think, depending on programs. I think in engineering it's more common to contact the professor and they admit you. But like a lot of chemistry programs, when I was even emailing professor, they would say apply for the schools and then we talk, kind of thing.
Yeah, there are. This is a very important point that you bring up, and it's important because admissions work differently. There are a few different models. It's like direct to PI. There's admitted as a cohort. There is rotation systems. Make sure to ask the director of graduate studies or the person in the administration's office, in the department office, how that program works. Because if you're going to spend $100 or $120 on the application fee, hopefully you can get that waived if possible. If you're going to do that, then you want to know that you have the best chance, or you want to know how that system operates, and don't just send in an application blindly without asking the specific, if it's a case where a professor needs to be aware of your application, make sure that that professor knows if it's that kind of school.
Thank you. So what are the red flags a prospective student should pay attention to and watch out for? You have
High attrition rates. The red flags are high attrition rates. The red flags are students not getting the type of employment that they wanted after um, after going into that they wanted when they started the graduate program. I would look for evidence that the students are depressed, or that there are people who have been in the lab for 7 or more years. I think those are red flags.
Yeah, I agree. So someone asked, they can't make decision about master or PhD. Should they just try master first and see how they like research and then switch to PhD? But a lot of master programs don't have the salary that the PhD students get. So do you have any advice for people who haven't made up their mind yet?
I would almost always apply to the PhD program because the program will pay for it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the priority for TA ships are usually given to PhD students and not master's students. There are the reason to apply for a master's degree, if the program even allows you to apply to a terminal master's degree, a lot of chemistry departments don't allow it. Most engineering departments do allow it. But if you apply directly to the master's program, know that TA positions are hard to get, and that you may be on the hook for the whole tuition. But if you have some financial flexibility, it may make sense to do it.
Thank you. So Cynthia is asking, is there any recommendation for picking between similar research topics that are under same general topic but divert into more niche fields?
I would make a decision between laboratories with similar research topics based on on your comfort level hanging out in that group. Like, try to, because ultimately a human being can do like any kind of work as long as they enjoy the environment. And of course that's not like, it's not a rule, but there sometimes you'll find yourself in a task like stuffing envelopes. I did that the other day, like with our student services office, to like stuff envelopes to be mailed out. And that was like such a fun afternoon because I really enjoyed talking to the other staff members at the event. It didn't use my degree. It didn't engage me like the work itself didn't engage me intellectually. But the same thing is true in your, you know, the work that you ostensibly love, like your science work. If I liked one topic or one downstream application 10% less than another, but I like the people in that group 100% more, or I like the support that I was getting from the advisor 100% more, there's no question which way I would go, even if it were a much smaller difference.
Thank you. So Soham is asking, I've been advised to build a relationship with PIs before applying. How do I go about it? Should I just reach out and upfront say I'm interested in PhD position? And someone else asked that something similar, that they are sending a lot of emails but not getting any response. So is there a way to, get professors to respond to you, and what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, so not getting a response from an email when you reach out isn't necessarily it is a necessary condition for a red flag, but not a sufficient condition for a red flag. It is, if they respond to you, it's definitely not a red flag. If they respond to you, it's a green flag. If they don't respond, there could be I hate when professors don't respond to student inquiries. I respond to every student inquiry except for when I get an email, there is no indication at all that the applicant even knows what I work on. Those I will not respond to because they were obviously like sent to 100 people all at once.
That's a good point. Yeah.
If you send a thoughtful email that explains what you are interested in and why you are interested in that person's research, and some evidence maybe that you've read one of their papers, or that you saw one of their YouTube talks, or that you read their Twitter feed and that you really like what they say in their Twitter feed, and you still don't get a response, forget that person.
I agree with your point about, these emails that are sent to 100 people, and it's similar to job applications. If we have job posting, if we get these resumes, as obviously they have not even read the job description and they haven't really worked on at least making some adjustment in the resume at kind of, for even, it's like, getting into a lab is similar to sort of job application. So you need to put a little bit of effort on it and not just write one thing and then send it to 100 people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The most recent, yeah, totally agree. There's a comment in the chat that I want to respond to just for clarification. So if the research topics are similar, but I like one topic a little bit more, I will choose the other lab where I don't like the research as much if the culture is significantly better. If the trust and openness and support is better in the other lab, I would join it even though the research is not exactly as much to my liking.
Thank you. So if you like to join a team, but you realize that their funding is low and you might have to teach many hours for the whole PhD program, would you recommend joining those teams?
There have to be some fairly significant compensatory reasons to join a lab, knowing that you would have to TA every semester. I know people who have done it. They tend to find a way to adapt. And if they teach the same course over and over and over again, they might be able to spend a lot less time, each consecutive year. So say a typical full-time TA position is 20 hours per week. And maybe if they've taught the course a few semesters in a row, they might be able to get that down to 6 hours per week. But grading takes a long time. Maybe now with everything being on Canvas or Blackboard or whatever, a lot more grading can be automated and it's easier. But it still can be a lot of time. If, however, the advisor is known to be supportive, maybe it's a sacrifice that you can make.
Thank you. So there are some, especially international students, that they are worried that they might not be able, because they don't have any visitation weekend. So let's say they pick the wrong advisor and they regret their decision. What would you recommend about how easy it is to change labs once you've joined a lab already?
It is, I would say that half of the graduate students in my lab historically started elsewhere. So that is in other labs or were master's students and converted to a PhD. So, often master's students in another lab. So this happens a lot in my experience. It is not as difficult as people tend to think it is, but it is still difficult. There are, however, support structures. There are, at some universities, special sources of funding, special sources of bridge funding, or if you quit one lab, they will actually pay your expenses for maybe 1 quarter or a semester in order to find another solution. You can oftentimes do a TA-ship during that quarter. I would reach out to people who are professionals in managing this type of dispute. So almost every academic division has an associate dean for students. This is a professor who has this role of the student experience and is ultimately responsible for student success and will know what resources are available. If it's a particularly toxic experience, toxic relationship with an advisor, then there are also mental health counselors on every campus, and that is an underutilized resource in my experience. It's why it's important during your orientation period and to make friends, to develop relationships outside of just the one with your PI, in case that relationship goes south. But there are a couple different reasons. There are multiple reasons why one might want to leave a lab. One is a toxic relationship with a PI. Another is because the research isn't working or is not what you thought it was going to be. And those necessitate different choices and where to go for remediation.
Thank you. If I can add, the size of a school department also has an effect. I don't know how big UC San Diego, the chemistry department was, but when I was in Hopkins, we had total 10 to 12 faculty, and like there were not many professors in each field. So you had like maybe one more choice of inorganic chemistry, one more choice of
Mhm.
like, so that also was important. And if that one alternative had, they had a maximum number of students in their lab, they didn't have funding, then that would limit your choices. So I think the size of the school might be also a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right, Atafe. Thank you. Good point.
Yeah, yeah. We had, when I started in Hopkins, I think we had 20 incoming graduate students, and only 8 or 7 graduated. Like more than half of students mastered out. Um, um, so the question: many PhD advisors aren't supportive of industry careers. How do you recommend opening the conversation with them and tell them that you don't want to go to academia and you just want to go in the industry?
Yeah. You could tell by my reaction how I might feel about this. Professors who are not supportive of industry careers should not be professors. That is a massive red flag. Red flag. We were talking about red flags. Um, a professor has to know that they only need to train one person to become a professor in their career in order to like replace them when they retire. Maybe two given the turnover. Um, the I think if a I think that discussion needs to be brought up before the decision to like go to that school. That
Yeah,
if somebody is, you know, sure they want a position in industry, um, or government, or uh, scientific journalism, or law, or intellectual property, um, then there are ways of figuring out whether or not the PI is supportive. And you sometimes don't even have to ask them. You can ask the students for alumni like lists.
yeah. Thank you for your answer. So you briefly touched upon the location, but if someone wants to, for example, work for biotech, being in a school in Boston area or SFA area, is that more preferable? Knowing where you are close to that specific industry that you want to end up working in.
So if you want to join an industry that's concentrated in one location, that is I don't think it's quite as important as one might think, and part of it has to do with the fact that you're very limited. Particularly, I hate to say this at an ACS East Bay sponsored event, um, but there aren't that. I mean, you have Berkeley, Stanford, Davis, Santa Cruz,
Yeah,
but even once you get a little bit farther out, the next school is very far away.
like
So like,
Mercy. I don't know.
right, yeah, that's quite far. um, and in Boston, there is a little bit more of a clustering of R1s, but really these places represent just a tiny fraction of places. If you want to go to biotech, Atlanta is a great place. Chicago is a great place. Baylor College of Medicine, like Houston in general, um, uh, Austin, Texas, Southern California. These are all great places to be. And I left off a million other, fantastic
Yeah.
places. So I wouldn't, yeah,
Thank you
I wouldn't
so.
take that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I realize we are actually past the time, so I ask one last question, and I think we can close out the Q&A part. So if you have an academic gap, how is the chance of getting PhD admission if you have quit this, you have gone with your undergrad, did other things, and you want to go back to graduate school?
For me, and a gap between undergraduate and graduate school is a major plus. I
Amazing.
have had when I started my position, two of my four graduate students were older than me. This was 10 years ago. And in fact, when my most current PhD graduate defended on June 25th, I, for the first time in 9 years, became the oldest member of my lab because he had started before they left, and he had taken off 10 years to do sound technician work in the music industry.
So it was
And
completely unrelated, though they didn't work in industry related to chemistry during that
right,
time.
that's right. It was so I'm in an engineering department, but so I think the fearlessness with like equipment helped. But in that case, yeah, it was a position completely unrelated to science. But that student, uh, you know, ended up completing their PhD and did well. So yeah, I'm very positive about academic gaps. There are other places where gaps are maybe not as desirable, and other places in one's career, and that might be between postdoc and applying for a faculty position, or between PhD and postdoc, where the considerations are a little bit more difficult.
I think for those also, if you can, it's all about how you tell the story and then what you say. I think maybe that also has effect, like what happened and what were the specific circumstances.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. This was great. Thanks everyone for active participation, asking so many questions. Sorry, there were some questions that I didn't get to ask. We are already past the past one, so I don't want to take especially Dr. Lipomi's time more than this. Thank you so much, Dr. Lipomi. Thanks everyone for attending our event. And as I mentioned, we have another event August 4th that we are hoping to see you there too. Thank you all and have a great day and evening or morning, wherever in the world you are. Thank you. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
Atafe. Great. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody, for your attention and for sticking with us for the whole hour. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.